Welcome to IAMTV. I'm Alan Keyes, and this is Let's Talk America. Today I'm going to be talking to someone. I was anxious to have him on the program as I got to see and know more about, well, it's not just what he says and what he knows, but his way of approaching what he knows and how he applies it to the situations that we are now faced with. Particularly the COVID-19, but he has a background that combines things in such a way that various aspects of our present crisis are things that he can address knowledgeably while relating them to one another with the same kind of comprehensive sense of what's actually happening in each sphere. It's really a wonder to behold, and I'm very glad to be able to share that with you in the course of this program. We'll be talking about what the situation we face, but we'll try to do it, I hope, in a way that will help you as viewers, but also as participants in the process, because as citizens of the United States, we are participants, and we're going to have to make judgments that will be, I hope, better informed by my discussion with my very special guest today. So stay right there. We'll be right back.
More IAMTV episodes? We are now streaming through Roku. Roku is a device that enables you to stream entertainment to your TV through your internet provider. The starting price is only $29, and you can purchase one either online or through your local electronics retailer. It's easy to use, and you won't have to worry about missing any more IAMTV episodes. IAMTV, changing the world.
Podcasts are great when you're a multitasking person. You can listen to them around the house, when you're out in the car, when you take a walk. Now we have put our shows on to podcasts, and you can listen to Let's Talk America on podcasts. You can find them at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other apps. But while you're there, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our new episodes. Thanks for listening and supporting us. Together, we're changing the world. Welcome back. My guest today is somebody, he has a very creditable following on YouTube because of his generous sharing of himself with folks in the midst of this coronavirus crisis, but also about other things. But when I have watched him, and when I've watched him, whether being interviewed, in discussions, he's one of those few people who reminds me, in terms of his background and the various things that he can talk about, he reminds me of America's founders. Why? Because a number of them, particularly the ones who were most influential, were people who were not restricted to this or that. They had minds that would be involved in and trying to understand various fields that look like they're discrete, but that then must be related when you are dealing with the problems that actually challenge us as a society and even as individuals. And Paul Cottrell is somebody who has that kind of a background. I mean, he started out as somebody who was, he studied chaos theory, mechanical engineering. He has gotten involved in the financial markets and modeling for investment and things of that kind. Now he's involved in preparing himself to become a doctor, get a medical degree, and also he is obviously going into and absorbing the kind of understanding of chemistry and physics and other things required for that degree, but also, as it turns out, required to help us understand the crisis that we face and the threat, if we just focus for a moment on COVID-19 and the SARS-2 virus, that is leading us as a nation to make momentous decisions that look like they're going to have a major impact on the history of this country and the world we live in, one way or another. And I can't think, Paul, of somebody better to talk to about all of this than somebody who has the depth of background in a lot of these different areas that you prove to have. So thank you for coming on the show, taking the time to talk to me and to talk to my audience out there today. I want to start out with a question that I think is fundamental to the moment we're in, because it all takes place under, at the moment, the rubric of two things. The fact that we are working on trying to endure the attack of the virus, right? The COVID-19 virus. We're working on that. And we've been working on it by being told not to go to work but to stay home and do various things. We've been doing that quite dutifully in various ways for several weeks now. A debate is going on about whether we can start to get back to work, and it seems to me to be kind of necessary in economic terms for us to do that. But at the same time, that has to be weighed against what has been characterized as the threat from the virus and the way we are handling that threat and what's required in order to deal with it. I think a lot of it hinges on, right at the very first part of the discussion, on an understanding of how we got into this situation. And I thought I might put that question to you first. When you look back on the record of the last several months, and really have to go back into the last year if you're dealing with certain aspects of the situation, how did this situation arise as you see it? And what is, in point of fact, the real nature of the danger that we're facing?
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And for me, it started on January 25th when I just had an intellectual curiosity to take a look at the genomic information that was on the NIH database. And after a very short amount of time, I came to the conclusion that it was bioengineered, that this was a bioengineered situation. And it set me in motion into a scientific discovery. So Dr. Keyes, you know that you set a hypothesis and you investigate that hypothesis and refine it based on new information. So I had a hypothesis that it was a bioengineered virus based on what I saw from genomic data. Well, that led me to take a look at the probability of seeing very unique components within this virus, and that proved that it would be a very low probability that this was a zoonotic situation where it was just naturally made. And being by a wet lab, or wet market right next to a P4 lab in Wuhan, and you look at the probability of this situation and this situation and this situation happening, that it would be a very, very small probability. So then you dive into the literature, which is where the magic sauce is. And there was a publication in 2008 by a group of researchers, primarily from Wuhan, that shows on how they took bat SARS-like virus, SARS virus, and HIV homology in what they call a pseudovirus to create the jump between bat ACE2 receptor to the human ACE2 receptor. This was published in 2008. So research is done in biology, in the molecular biology world, to understand why certain hosts, animal hosts, harbor certain viruses. Yeah. Well, they were trying to understand what was the mechanism in the bat host and how that potential jump from ACE2 bat receptor could jump to a human ACE2. They were able to design that in the lab, and you could make therapeutics off of that research, or vaccines off of that research. So there was a scientific line that was being developed in 2008.
So if I can interrupt 1 second, from what you just said, it sounds like, because a question that as you're describing this comes into mind. You have one way in which the animal handles the virus and the virus handles the animal in terms of getting into a cell, and you have another way that in a human that is handled. What would be the point of doing the research that took something that isn't able to penetrate the human cell and saw how and tried to find out how it would?
Well, right. So what we do in the laboratory is that we, for lack of a better term, supercharge a particular virus, have it jump species so you can understand the mechanisms and how it may infect the human body, and then design therapeutics against that.
But it could also have the purpose of just finding out how to do that, right?
Right. So that what they were doing in 2008 was studying the biochemistry on how that jump to ACE2, human ACE2 receptor could happen if it happened zoonotically, and then would have a therapeutic ready if it did happen. All right. Now there's a lot of chemistry to understand why does the bat host allow for SARS viruses to just naturally happen in its natural environment. You know, is it down regulating the immune system? So you have to do these kind of experiments in the lab to understand that mechanism in the bat host, and if it does jump zoonotically, that we're prepared to have therapeutics. Now, what happens is that as the scientific discovery increased and other papers were published after 2008, you could see on how Dr. Shi and Dr. Pyung Zhao developed this virus and gained more and more function.
Now, your Dr. Shi was at the Wuhan lab, right?
Dr. Shi eventually is transferred to the Wuhan lab.
Okay.
So Dr. Shi, or sometimes she's called the Bat Lady, but Dr. Shi eventually is working at University of North Carolina, and there is a weapons program that is being developed with Fort Detrick. So the scientific line that was being developed eventually bifurcates, and there's a weapons program that's developed to add gain of function. Then around 2014, Obama shuts down the program. And Fauci was involved in this development program and funding different labs. University of North Carolina is one of them, all right? And Dr. Shi, after the weapons program is shut down, transfers over to P4. This is the Wuhan Virology Department, the University of Wuhan, and the P4 facility is there. She continues the research and continues the gain of function. Now, there is recent publications that show that this virus, SARS-CoV-2, infects not just the ACE2 receptor, it infects the CD147 receptor, and it infects the CD209 and 299 receptors. The reason why these are important.
For the sake of the audience, could you explain what the word receptor is about in terms of the process we're
okay, so SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19 disease, has a spike protein.
That's those little things that stick up that look like, that give it that crown-like look, right?
That's correct. That is the key, and the receptor is the lock. The receptor is a protein that's on the surface of a cell, the cell membrane. And if you have enough viral load, the virus could attach to the receptor and then allow for its payload to be brought into the cell.
Yeah.
That payload is an RNA genome that will, start replicating the virus and infecting the host. So we have multiple receptors. The key is that there was gain of function not just on the ACE2, but there was additional gain of function on multiple receptors. These receptors that I just mentioned, they're part of the immune system, and there has been publications that in peer-reviewed journals that talk about T cells being infected through the CD147 pathway. On top of it, we have heard from ICU doctors and ER doctors that they're concerned with this ARDS versus non-ARDS. Early on in the disease interpretation, the clinical interpretation, they thought that putting individuals on ventilators would be the proper course of action. Well, a lot more research has gone down the road that it's maybe a non-ARDS situation, hypoxia, instead of an ARDS hypoxia. So what is happening is that our red blood cells and our T cells are being infected by this virus, not just the ACE2 cells.
That means it's not just a lung problem, it's a blood problem.
That's correct. This disease, to make it very clear, this disease can present itself neurologically, pulmonarily, and through the blood. So it can go through the olfactory and actually have clinical presentation and manifest itself in the basal ganglia. Sometimes you've heard cases where there's this sudden drop of blood pressure, or people just pass out.
Yeah.
There's a neurological component to this, or individuals just spitting, and acting irrationally. This is part of that neurological component. In research papers just released maybe about a week and a half ago, they're talking about skin discoloration. It's not because of the dermis. It's not because of the skin. It's actually the peripheral nervous system nerve endings that are going up to the surface of the skin getting infected. So this is a neurological disease that could affect the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. It is a blood disease that's affecting the red blood cells and the T cells. So what happens is your immune system will start to go down. Your red blood cell count, or your red blood cell is infected and causing the heme not to have a strong affinity to the oxygen, and this is causing the hypoxia.
Oh.
So this goes right with what Dr. Kyle Siddell was suggesting, that, well, this seems like some sort of altitude sickness hypoxia thing, but what it really is that the red blood cells are being infected, and it's not having the proper affinity to the oxygen.
Well, let me pause for a second in going ahead and focus on this for a minute, because from what we've been hearing, right, I characterize this period we're in now as a kind of, I don't know if you remember the play. There was a play at one time, I think was it Sartre or Camus, one of them, Waiting for Godot. Remember that play? Two guys were sitting on a stage, they're waiting for somebody to show up, they're talking to one another. Anyway, we're in the waiting for vaccine stage, right? Everybody's waiting for a vaccine, waiting for a vaccine. But from what you're describing, is there going to be a vaccine that kind of miraculously solves all of this?
I don't believe there will be. And I think this is the point that when we did when Fort Detrick started the weapons program, and it was enhanced by the P4 lab in China, there is a gain of function that is beyond just one receptor. It's multiple receptors, and I call it pinballing. So what will happen is it'll lose affinity for one as there's mutations taking place. Viruses don't replicate very well. That's the reason why there's high mutations. They don't have a proofreading mechanism for their genome like we do when we multiply our DNA. So the replicase makes mistakes and causes mutations. And through natural selection, you will either have viruses attenuate, get weaker, or you may have new gain of function. This thing is designed in such a way where there is a pinballing that's taking place between receptors. It has a very strong affinity for the ACE2 that goes all the way back to 2008 development. But there is this gain of function or increased affinity to the CD147 pathway. And other receptors are that have high potentiality, like the CD209 and 299 receptors, and also the GRP78 receptor. So with the GRP78 receptor, that is a chaperone receptor within the cell. But if the cell is stressed, like you've already been infected or you have comorbidities, you may be upregulating certain proteins. All right. So this chaperone protein could be upregulated and then go up to the surface of the cell and actually be a docking station for the spike protein. So this is maybe one of the mechanisms of many that secondary infection could be explained.
But let me jump now, because while we're on this subject and and we're dealing with it, I see an implication. If we're in a situation where there's not going to be a kind of miraculous one vaccine rifle shot that makes the whole thing better, and we're waiting for that to happen, and meanwhile, right, we're still dealing at the moment with deaths and other things that are going on, but in the midst of all of that, a decision has been taken to shut things down in order to avoid the spread of the vaccine. It seems to me that just like the body can get into a little race between producing the antibody and the spread of the disease that's destroying the tissues, we seem to be in a little bit of a race between coming up with a solution that's going to somehow deal with the virus and sitting on our hands while our economy crashes and our way of life goes with it. Does that make sense, what I just said? Because if that's our dilemma, I'm not sure how what's going on right now gets us out of the problem. It's like we're in a catch-22.
Well, there's a lot to unpack. And, you know, I'll try the best of my ability to unpack it with the allotted time that we have, because this particular topic could be a dissertation. but the platform that Fauci is promoting for the vaccine is a messenger RNA platform. There are many different types of vaccines that could be developed. I don't have the time to really explain them, but the messenger RNA platform is the newest technology, but the least known long-term. There isn't long-term data on messenger RNA vaccines and what they do to the body a decade, 2 decades from now. All right, and it's designed to try to neutralize. It's designed for us to develop an antibody, so our antibodies would neutralize if we receive, let's say, SARS-CoV-2. All right, but if the virus is pinballing between receptors, right, the messenger RNA platform is not going to work well, assuming that it is a safe vaccine. And there's some big assumptions about how safe messenger RNA platforms are. Yeah. That we don't know because we never tested it. So let's just say it's a safe platform to use, and an antibody is created, but that's only going to work for, let's say, the ACE2 affinity. If you have viruses that become, the SARS-CoV-2 have more affinity, let's say the CD209 receptor, then you're going to need another vaccine. And this is my concern. Well, there seems to be
we're coming down the wires, why I'm interrupting you for a second, because we have to go out to a break. But if what you're saying is correct, it seems to me that we're waiting for something that, even if it happens, we're still going to face a future in which we're going potentially to be hit again. And when I get back, I'm going to try to get back to that so you can finish unpacking it, but also suggest a possibility and then see what you would say about it. We'll be right back after this. If you're ready to stop listening to this, then you're not as interested in the survival of this country as I thought. So stay put. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Alan Keyes. I just want to let you know that on a recurring basis every Tuesday, we're going to have a guest, Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. He's going to be joining us to talk about the whole array of challenges, both in terms of our health as a people and as individuals, and our health as a nation. We'll be looking at those things through the eyes of someone who has thought deeply about many things and who has many great ideas to share with me and with you and with everyone who tunes in to Let's Talk America on Tuesdays, when we meet with the Health Ranger to talk about how we sustain the health of our liberty. We are in the middle of a fascinating discussion with Paul Cottrell, who has been applying his very substantial intellect to trying to understand what we're actually faced with in this COVID crisis, the nature of the viruses that are involved, what is the implication of the way in which they are interacting with the human body, what dangers and special kinds of dangers it poses. And it seems to me, Paul, that from what you're saying, my first sort of thought is we've been treating this as if it's an episode. But if what you're saying and what you're implying is correct, then it's not an episode so much as the first salvo, as it were, in what will be a series of episodes that more or less put us in a situation where for quite a while we'll be under threat. Am I wrong?
You're absolutely correct. I think it's a safe assumption to assume with the data that we have currently that there's going to be multiple waves. And the true test is when New York City, which is where I live, gets out of shelter in place. Do we have reinfection? Do we have a second wave? There's some evidence that China does have a second wave. So when we do the grand experiment and we get out of shelter in place, if we do have the second wave and we start to see more of this non-ARDS hypoxia, then we have more data points that proves that this is going to be way beyond just one episode, that this is going to be something that may be with us for a very long time. I have been saying from the very beginning that I thought there was going to be 3 waves and that this was going to last for about 18 to 20 months. And this wasn't going to be the normal flu. And I've shared some CT scans to some key people that I talked to that proves that this is not just the normal flu. All right. And I'm very concerned not only of the pinballing of the receptors that we were talking about earlier, but I'm also concerned the ones that have the fibrotic scarring in the lung, that it will start seeing syndromes that we will call it the Wuhan syndrome 5 years later, similar to what happened right after 9/11 when there was the 9/11 syndromes for the first responders. There's going to be some sort of disease, chronic manifestation downstream years from now that we'll associate with this particular episode. But I'm also concerned because this is a blood disease that the last time we've heard the T cells being infected by a quote virus, SARS-CoV-2 in this case, was the 1980s when we started talking about HIV. And since this thing has HIV homology, to be able to allow for a higher affinity to the ACE2 receptor, that is how the researchers were able to jump species, was through the HIV homology.
That is one of the aspects that you think reflects engineering?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Well, that's one. I mean, the other is that what they did was they took the bat SARS-like virus, which has the stronger replicase, and the SARS virus that has the stronger spike protein, and then increased the virulence of the spike protein by adding the HIV homology.
Now, I would like, if I could interrupt again, because while we're here, right, and hopefully those who are following understand a little bit about where we are, I want to draw an implication because sometimes we might not be as lively in our sense of what we're looking at. So we've gone from a situation where we have an attack and we're trying to deal with it, to a situation where I would say it looks like we have a war. And we've got to find a strategy for both enduring and winning it. Mm-hmm. And because it's going to be more than one episode, right? It would
That's
be,
right.
well, it would be like happened in what actually did happen in World War II. They attacked Pearl Harbor, but then they attacked other places, and we kept having to deal with those attacks in various ways. And so we had a war on our hands. We didn't just have an isolated attack. Our response to the attack has been to take, I always thought of it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the whole business of sending, say, stay home, don't go to work, do this, do that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that gives us a chance to take stock, right? To get a sense of where we are. But it, to me, couldn't represent a strategy for dealing with the war, right? If we're going to face this again and again, because shutting down the way we have implies that we're going to surrender our ability to sustain ourselves in other respects. It would be like deciding that in order to deal with the virus, we're going to stop eating, forgetting that we'll starve to death then. And so we're going to starve to death if we have to keep repeatedly damaging our economy in this way in order to survive attacks, if we have to experience them, whether it's natural or not natural. I don't want to get into that big discussion. But either way, don't we have to find a more effective way of dealing with the consequences of the attack than shutting down the system?
There's a war within a war. There's a biological war, and then there's also our civil liberty war. And there is the whole idea of taking risks. Now, was it prudent to do the shelter in place and the shut down the economy early on? Yes, because we were dealing with an unknown. We have more data, and we realize that high density areas like New York and Boston are epicenters for this. But in, let's say, middle America, we don't have as many cases. And there's some strong evidence that it may have something to do with D3 levels and comorbidity issues that take place, not just population densities. So we are starting to understand that one tool that we can use to fight this war is actually how do we boost our immune system, all right? And there are many ways to do that. And, another way is, yes, social distancing did help, but you can't just be doing social distancing for the next 18 months. We'll destroy this country. We can't do that. And so I have been trying for the last week or two to tell my audience that we have more data. We understand what is going on in the hospitals. The hospitals are now staffed correctly with the right equipment. They know what they're basically doing and they know what this is, or somewhat what it is, and the non-ARDS component to it now, that we can get out of shelter in place and start rebooting our economy. But that doesn't mean that people won't get sick. There is this casualty that's going to take place as we continue through the war. This episode 1, or the first wave, that's the first battle in the war. The next wave is going to be the next battle.
Well,
but it's a war within a war.
Yes,
because the point I'm making here is it's not just the virus. It is the erosion of our civil liberties.
Well, if I can pause on that point to go in one direction, because when we use the term, we always think we're just being metaphorical, right, with war. But in point of fact, there are aspects of this that very much remind me of actual battles. And it seems to me two things are important when you find yourself a troop on the front line of the battle, important to you. One has to do with the training that you have had, but also the character that you have developed, because that's a very fearsome situation. And your training has hopefully helped you to deal with the fear, right? Because you're not going to be able to continue the battle if fear paralyzes you or leads you to turn tail and run. This is not going to be useful. So you have to find a way to deal with the fear, to tap into, if I can put it that way, your courage. That's one aspect of the situation that seems to have a parallel in our own situation, right? And then there's the other part that people forget can have a relationship to the fear. Part of the reason that you concentrate on training and equipping your military forces is because that combination contributes to fighting the fear. People fight the fear better when they have been well trained to have the character, the inward resolve, the understanding of their mission and their purpose and their commitment to it, to do that. But they also tend to endure fear better when they feel like they've been equipped properly to fight it. And it seems to me we've been concentrating on the fearsome nature of the virus and getting away from it so it doesn't spread and so forth and so on. And we've been neglecting those two very important elements, because in a way, the fear is growing pretty much unabated. And if there is another wave, I have a feeling that that's going to be aggravated. And the frontline people who have been talking to us, you mentioned one of them, about what's actually happening, Seidel, on the front lines, we haven't been concentrating on what we can do to help them deal with the effects. Therapies that could be developed, things that can be done, so that as we move through time, we are able to strengthen our forces, which is the whole population actually, in order to feel that they are equipped in their habits, their abilities, with various kinds of information and knowledge that will help their bodies to be in a position to fight more strongly. So we need that equipment. Don't you think this requires a whole shift in what we've been doing, a task force that would focus on those actual elements of preparing people to endure this battle?
Absolutely. And not only that, the CCP did that for their own population. We know for a fact that they procured vitamin C in large quantities. That's a fact. But another fact is that we have YouTube channels being shut down for people promoting, you know what, American citizens, start taking your vitamin C to boost your immune system to fight COVID-19. It's not that it's a cure, but what it is it'll give you a fighting chance to boost your immune system.
Why would they shut that down, Paul?
Because I personally believe that they want the messenger RNA platform and to have never-ending vaccines. What is the see, this is why I'm saying there's a war within a war. There is an orchestrated effort to use this as an opportunity, quote opportunity, to accelerate the forced vaccine program. And this goes to a much larger concept. And I'm doing the best that I can with the time allotted.
Oh, but no, you're doing very well.
Right after 9/11, we had the Patriot Act. And that set in motion for a never-ending surveillance state. And we killed the bad guys in the Middle East. And it was actually my generation, Gen X, that did it. All right. And the thing is, they didn't roll back to a pre-9/11 day when we got the mission done. And then what do we have? We have this crisis that's taking place, and we have people in power like Fauci, Birx, and Redfield that were part of a weapons program that unleashed this hell on everybody. And now they're promoting a messenger RNA platform where they may be doing forced vaccines. We already know that Cuomo is saying that, you know what, we're going to start testing people for antibodies, and we're going to start instituting some policies that maybe you don't go back to work unless you have an antibody. Well, how do you get the antibody unless you have COVID-19 disease, or they give you the antibody through a vaccine? So that in itself is forced vaccines to just go to work. So this goes to a larger concept that I started talking about early on my channel, is the Bio-Patriot Act. This is our new 9/11. And that if people don't wake up, there's going to be forced vaccines and there's going to be this surveillance grid with 5G. 5G is going to institute the ability to triangulate individuals and understand not only their particular movements, but their first degree and second degree separation of their social networks, and read that in real time. And we've heard social scoring in China. Well, if you don't get your vaccine, you get a lower social score. Therefore, you maybe can't travel, and if you can't travel, you may not be able to get a job. Or you can see that this is never-ending tyranny that goes back to an earlier discussion that we were talking about with the technocrats.
But that makes it look as if what we're doing that is being sold as somehow controlling the spread of the virus, right? If you can put it in very simple terms, ends up becoming an excuse over a long period, because the threat of the virus becomes a kind of permanent war, right? And I used to have, in my speeches when I was still giving those things in politics, I used to tell people that perpetual war is very dangerous to liberty, right? And very often people who want to destroy liberty will arrange to have wars going on all the time, because that's a very good way to excuse suppressing all kinds of liberty. It looks like what you're describing is a very good, well, let's say pretext, what you write beforehand, right, in order to then justify what you're going to write next, which is a whole slew of commands and rules and instructions and methods of making sure that you're in control of where individuals are, what they do, what work they do, how much they get paid, and so forth and so on. All the decisions that we thought should be left up to the free, responsible choices and intelligent choices and faithful choices of individuals. That's a fundamental transformation of our way of life. So in order to be safe from the virus, we're going to kill our way of life?
That's what the powers that be are trying to do. And that's why I said that it's so important to prevent this Biopatriot Act from becoming law. Now, it's not going to be packaged in a bow saying Biopatriot Act. It's going to be in bits and pieces, and probably in like these supplement bills for stimulus. The very first one that came out, Pelosi wanted to put in decashing. So so for people that don't understand what the Biopatriot Act really means, it has a decashing component, so you can't take money out of the banking system, so they can have negative interest rates. It is the forcing of vaccines on individuals, a tracking mechanism. Now, what that tracking mechanism is, we don't really know. Maybe it's chipping, maybe it's not. There is the social scoring aspect to it, that if you don't have an antibody or if you don't have the vaccine, then you may not be able to go to work. So there's this, they're trying to corral us. There is a Warsaw ghettoing that is taking place. Now, I'm Jewish, all right? And my grandmother lost her mother and brother in the Holocaust, all right? And we were told as kids that we do everything in our power to make sure that another Warsaw ghetto and another Holocaust does not happen. And I'll tell you what, forced vaccines and chipping and this type of surveillance, to me, is another Holocaust. And any group of people, even African Americans during the slavery period in the United States, that was an atrocity. Mm-hmm. But there are components of this tyranny within the Biopatriot Act that is going to start ghettoizing us, and it's not going to be because of religion or race. It's going to be because you don't have the antibody. It's going to be biological, if you want to call it biological racism, if you want to call it that. But there's going to be this. We're moving in a direction where it's eroding our civil liberties. Look at what just happened on the news in New York. where someone wasn't wearing a mask and how violent the NYPD was. That was totally unacceptable. Or what about what's going on right after 9/11? Why do these police officers have military weapon grade equipment and drones flying up and down the East River telling the citizens of New York City to go back inside, and do shelter in place? Same thing's happening in New Jersey. It's not just NYPD. So this is moving towards a RoboCop, and we need to stand up as citizens to say no.
Part of what you're describing, which I think the further we get into this and the more we think it through, people have resisted all along trying to do this kind of extrapolation. But I think with what's going on, more people are waking up to the fact that we need to think this through in just this way. Because the other connection that I find disturbing is the WHO connection to Bill Gates. WHO having, as we all know, been a very cooperative partner in terms of not letting everybody know what was going on when it was going on, which might have contributed to people being a little bit better prepared in different countries and be a little further along the road of figuring out what was really going on. But the reason I find the Bill Gates connection disturbing is that he and his wife have a foundation that is actually committed to population reduction. Since I saw that TED Talks thing of his years ago, where he was talking about the carrying capacity of the Earth, and we were at that time, I think, 7 to 8 billion, and he said we have to get down to 1 billion or lower. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you do that without killing a lot of people? That sounds to me like you're going to have really suppressive tactics, and you're going to have some excuse to kind of cull the herd that I would regard as mass murder. Something about what you're saying seems to me to be putting in front of us something that could be used, and we would have to ask the question, is this going to be used to spare us the danger, or to inflict upon us the desired result, meaning death? Couldn't it go both ways with a vaccine?
Well, yeah. I mean, not only that, there's something called antibody-dependent enhancement. It's not common, but we're not dealing with a common thing with SARS-CoV-2. We're dealing with a bioweapon, and this might be part of the second wave. All right, it might be an epoxy. People that have worked with epoxies. There's a two-part solution, and it changes characteristics. Well, we have the SARS-CoV-2 disease, and the messenger RNA platform vaccine may actually allow for this antibody-dependent enhancement, and then you have a new type of disease, and it accelerates the pinballing that I was telling you about. Because the antibody that's created may actually enhance for it to have the affinity to the other receptors.
So that would mean that every time you mandated a vaccine to deal with what was this year's version of the threat, you could include something that was also selectively killing people.
Yes. Not only that, you can do that using this dependent enhancement that I just mentioned. But what scares me at the messenger RNA platform is that this is a RNA virus. All right. It's different from HIV because HIV is a retrovirus. Retroviruses have reverse transcriptase. All right. That's not something that's natural in our bodies. All right. So it can HIV integrated in our genome. My point here is that they could use the messenger RNA platform and have a Trojan horse and bring in a reverse transcriptase and mess around with your genome.
You know, we're getting into a discussion that I think really deserves to be thought through with care and seriousness because of its implications, not just for our way of life, but for all our lives. And that, I think, is going to require more time than we have left, which is only a few seconds, in which I have to thank you for starting us down a path that I hope we'll be able to continue with you over the course of time so that people can begin to get a more solidly grounded sense of what we need to be thinking through if we're to come out and get through all of this in a way that does not only spare us excessive physical death and pain and travail, but that also preserves our way of life based in the understanding that we enjoy responsibility for the exercise of rights that come from God, and we expect to live under a government that respects our capacity to exercise those rights in a way that is suitable to the common good of this whole country. That's what self-government has meant. But we don't seem right now to be aware of the fact that this is not just a crisis that involves a viral threat. It's a crisis that involves a threat to our very being as a nation. And you're helping us to think it through. So I hope you'll be able to join me again as soon as you can. And in the meanwhile, I'll say what I always say at the end of our programs here. Think about it. You know, we provide food for thought. We provide food for research even. If you want to go look up some of the words and get them fixed in your mind, you're going to need to do that. But in any case, ponder it and then join us again here at Let's Talk America.